The group of teenagers snickered as Mary refilled their coffees. "She's just a waitress," one sneered under his breath. Mary's hand shook at the cruel words, but she kept her head down and forced a polite smile. The hurt in her chest was a familiar ache. Just then, the diner's door chimed. An older man in a decorated army uniform walked in, instantly drawing eyes. He quietly took a seat nearby, but his sharp gaze noticed the disrespect unfolding. Moments later, another snide laugh made the uniformed man push back his chair. He rose to his full height, turned toward Mary, and snapped into a firm salute. The teenagers' laughter died in their throats. They stared in open-mouthed shock as the four-star general honored the humble waitress before them. "If you also believe everyone deserves respect, join our community." Mary Dawson woke before dawn, as she did every day. At 68 years old, her bones creaked in protest each morning, yet she still moved with quiet purpose. By 6 a.m., she had tied on her faded blue apron and walked the 2 blocks to Millie's Diner, the little roadside cafe where she worked. The small Texas town was just waking up, golden light spilling over dusty sidewalks and weathered storefronts. Mary loved these calm mornings. They reminded her of sunrises on the army base years ago, when she'd stand tall in a very different uniform. Back then, responsibility and respect had rested on her shoulders. Now, the only uniform she wore was a stained apron, and her duties were simply refilling coffees and offering warm smiles. Inside the diner, the aroma of bacon and eggs greeted her. She brewed the first pot of coffee and set the tables with care. A few regulars shuffled in early, locals who knew Mary by name. "Mornin', Miss Mary," drawled old Jim, tipping his hat as he took his usual seat. Mary poured him a cup with a friendly grin. To most folks in town, Mary was just the kind, quiet lady serving up eggs and coffee every morning. Few, if any, knew the life she had led before she started waiting tables. Mary never talked about it. What was the point? Those days were long past, and she was content to be helpful in her own small way now. As the morning wore on, a group of teenagers wandered in, not regulars, perhaps just passing through or cutting class. They tumbled into a booth with loud laughter and energy. Mary approached with her usual welcoming smile, coffee pot in hand. The teens barely looked at her, rattling off their orders in impatient tones. When she gently asked if they needed anything else, one of the boys muttered, "Just hurry up with the food, okay?" Mary nodded and shuffled back toward the counter. A slight sting pricked her heart, not so much from the words themselves, but from the dismissiveness in the boy's eyes. She'd faced far worse in her time, she reminded herself. A few rude kids were nothing compared to the challenges she once overcame. Have you ever been underestimated or judged unfairly because of your appearance or job? As lunchtime neared, Mary tried to shake off the encounter and focus on her tasks. She flipped burgers on the grill when the cook stepped away, balanced 3 plates along her arm to deliver orders, wiped down the counter between customers, all the while maintaining her courteous demeanor. Despite the teenagers' rudeness, she treated them with the same polite service she gave everyone else. Still, a sadness tugged at her. Once upon a time, Mary had commanded respect without ever needing to ask for it. Young soldiers half her age had looked up to her leadership and bravery. Now, to these kids, she was practically invisible, or worse, an easy target for ridicule. By early afternoon, the diner was bustling. Mary was clearing a table when a distinctive sound caught her ear, the cheerful jingle of the bell above the front door. Another customer. She turned with her usual polite greeting ready on her lips. But what she saw made her pause. A tall, broad-shouldered man in an impeccably pressed military uniform was stepping into the diner. Sunlight gleamed off the medals on his army dress jacket. He looked to be in his late 50s, with sharp, confident eyes that surveyed the room as if he were still on duty. Mary's breath hitched for a split second. It wasn't every day that someone like this walked into Millie's diner. One by one, conversations around the room trailed off as patrons noticed the imposing figure entering their humble eatery. Mary quickly regained her composure, grabbed a menu, and approached the man to seat him. Her mind buzzed with curiosity and a touch of nervousness. High-ranking officers in full uniform hardly ever showed up in these parts, unless there was a ceremony at the Veterans Hall or an event at the nearby base. What brings him here today? She wondered. Right this way, sir, Mary said softly, guiding the officer to a clean table by the window. He thanked her and took his seat, offering a polite smile as he settled in. Mary handed him a menu, and as she did, she couldn't help but notice the name tag on his uniform, Harris. Above it, rows of colorful ribbons adorned his chest, and on each shoulder Mary spotted 2 silver stars gleaming. A general. Her heart gave a quick, familiar flutter she hadn't felt in years, the instinctive respect of a soldier recognizing a superior rank. But she kept her face neutral and professional. After all, here she was just a waitress, and he was a customer. Little did Mary know, this very man had come to town on official business, and his path was about to cross hers in a life-changing way. In a few minutes, the course of Mary's ordinary day would take an extraordinary turn. Everything she had kept hidden was about to be brought into the light, right there in the middle of the crowded diner. Mary returned to the kitchen window to pick up the teenager's lunch order when it was up. As she loaded plates onto a tray, her mind kept drifting back to the imposing general by the window. She brought him a fresh top-up of coffee while he waited for his meal. As she poured, the general looked up at her with a curious, gentle smile. "Ma'am," he said in a low voice, "I couldn't help noticing your name. Mary Dawson. Did you serve in the Army?" Mary nearly spilled the coffee at the unexpected question. She steadied the pot, eyes wide with surprise. There was no hint of judgment in the man's expression, only genuine respect. "Yes, sir," she replied quietly, keeping her voice modest. "A long time ago." The general nodded, a spark of recognition lighting in his eyes. He leaned in slightly and lowered his voice further. "Captain Mary Dawson, 5th Medical Battalion?" he asked. A flash of both panic and pride surged in Mary's chest at hearing her old rank and unit aloud. She hadn't been called captain in many years. Her lips parted in astonishment. How did you know that?" she stammered, barely above a whisper. General Harris's stern features softened into a warm smile. "I read a report about the Red River Valley operation," he said. "There was a field medic captain who carried 12 wounded soldiers to safety under heavy fire." His eyes drifted to a faint, pale scar visible on Mary's forearm beneath her rolled sleeve. "You were awarded the Silver Star for that, if I recall correctly." Mary felt her throat tighten. The din of the diner seemed to fade as the memories rushed back. In her mind, Mary was back in the darkness of that valley years ago. Bullets whizzed overhead, tracer rounds streaking the night sky. The air reeked of smoke and dust. Young soldiers were crying out in pain, and then Captain Dawson sprinted between bursts of gunfire with her medical kit slung over her shoulder. "I've got you!" she yelled over the chaos, hoisting a wounded private off the ground. Her arms burned as she dragged the bleeding young man behind a wrecked Humvee that served as makeshift cover. Explosions thumped in the distance. The screams of the injured rang in her ears. Fear clutched at her heart, but she refused to leave anyone behind. Again and again, Mary darted back into the hellfire, pulling soldiers to safety one by one. Shrapnel sliced into her arm and smoke choked her lungs, but she didn't stop. By the time reinforcements arrived, 12 men owed their lives to her courage. She remembered collapsing to her knees, exhaustion and pain finally overtaking her as the medevac helicopters arrived. Blood soaked her uniform, some of it her own, most of it from others, as she knelt on that battlefield, surrounded by those she had saved. A sharp clap snapped Mary back to the present. She blinked, the war-torn night dissolving into the bright diner daylight. A customer at the counter had clapped his hands to get her attention for a refill. Mary realized she had been standing there, coffee pot in hand, completely lost in her memories in front of General Harris, her cheeks flushed with embarrassment. "I'm sorry," she murmured to the general, and quickly topped off his coffee to cover her lapse. General Harris just gave her a gentle, knowing nod. "No need to apologize, Captain," he whispered, kindly emphasizing her old title. Mary managed a timid smile. Heart still pounding, she backed away and returned to her duties. She felt exposed, as if this kindly stranger in uniform had glimpsed a piece of her soul that she usually kept hidden. In this quiet Texas diner, no one was supposed to know about Red River or her Silver Star. Mary drew a steadying breath and refocused on her work. Balancing the teenager's plates on her arm, she headed for their booth once more. For now, she told herself, she was just Mary the waitress again. She arrived at the teen's table with a polite smile. Carefully, she placed a burger and fries in front of each boy. "Finally," grumbled one boy, snatching up his burger almost before Mary's hand was away. Another teen rolled his eyes dramatically as she set down his plate. "Took you long enough," he muttered. Mary bit the inside of her cheek and maintained her gracious expression. "I'm sorry for the wait, hun. Enjoy," she said softly. None of the boys acknowledged her apology. As Mary turned to walk back to the counter, one of them called after her loudly, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "Hey, can we get some extra ketchup here? Today, maybe?" A couple of his friends snickered. Mary paused and nodded. "Of course, sweetheart," she replied as kindly as she could, reaching for the ketchup bottle on the next table. Her nerves were still jangling from reliving that battlefield memory and from the general's surprising questions. Her fingers slipped. The ketchup bottle slid from her grasp and hit the floor with a dull thud, then rolled under their booth. "Seriously?" groaned the teen who'd asked for it. He slid out of the booth to retrieve the bottle just as Mary anxiously knelt down as well. They nearly bumped heads. The boy snatched up the bottle before Mary could and thrust it toward her. "You're really off your game, lady," he snapped, shoving the ketchup into her hands. "Do you even know what you're doing?" Mary's face burned with humiliation. She clutched the bottle and stood up, cheeks as red as the ketchup. I'm so sorry," she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. The diner had grown quieter. A few other customers were now watching out of the corners of their eyes. As Mary stood there, one of the other teens chuckled and called out mockingly, "Maybe it's past your retirement home check-in time." That earned a chorus of low laughs from the group. Mary felt a sting of tears and quickly blinked them back. She opened her mouth to apologize yet again, or perhaps to say something in her own defense, but no words came. She simply turned, intending to retreat before her watering eyes gave her away. From his table by the window, General Harris had seen and heard enough. His jaw tightened as he watched the disrespect toward Mary unfold. In one decisive motion, he pushed back his chair and rose to his full height. His lunch lay untouched, growing cold, but that was the last thing on his mind now. Mary froze mid-step, noticing the uniformed figure striding toward the teen's booth. The midday sun glinted on the general's brass buttons as he approached with purpose. "Sir?" Mary breathed in alarm, not entirely sure what he intended to do. As he passed her, General Harris paused briefly to place a reassuring hand on her shoulder. That simple gesture somehow told her, "It's all right, you're not alone now." Mary stepped back, hastily wiping the moisture from the corner of her eye as the general moved to stand beside the booth of boys. The teenagers had been snickering over Mary's embarrassment, but they fell silent as a shadow loomed over them. One by one, they craned their necks upward to see the tall man in the military uniform now at their table. The laughter died entirely when they registered the hard, no-nonsense expression on his face and the rows of medals on his chest. General Harris looked from one boy to the next, his eyes like ice. He addressed them in a calm, steady tone that nonetheless commanded authority. "Gentlemen," he said evenly, "is there a problem here?" The lead teen, the one who had been the loudest, swallowed hard. Up close, he could see the insignia on the uniform, the twin stars on each shoulder. This man wasn't just some officer, he was a general. The boy's bravado faltered. No, sir, no problem," he mumbled, shrinking back in the booth. "We were just what?" General Harris interrupted, his voice cold and his gaze unwavering. The teenager withered under that gaze. His friends looked down at their plates, suddenly very interested in their uneaten food. We were just kidding around," the boy finished weakly, eyes on his French fries. Mary stood a couple of steps away, wringing her hands together. Her heart hammered in her chest. She wanted to tell the general that he didn't need to cause a scene on her behalf, that she'd endured far worse and would be all right. But another part of her, a part buried under years of quiet acceptance, felt a surge of gratitude and relief. Someone was finally standing up for her. One of the other teens, desperate to diffuse the tension, forced a shaky laugh. "Yeah, it was just a joke," he offered, nudging his friend's arm as if that would help. "No harm meant, right, guys?" He glanced around at his buddies, who all nodded slightly, still avoiding the general's eyes. General Harris's face remained stony. He wasn't placated. He glanced at Mary, seeing her distress and the tears she was trying so hard to hide. Then he looked back at the boys. In a measured, pointed tone, he asked, "Young man, do you have any idea who you're talking to?" He gestured toward Mary. The lead teenager blinked, confused. What kind of question was that? She's our waitress," he said, as if it should be obvious. The word waitress came out sounding dismissive. Emboldened slightly by his own reasoning, he added flippantly, "It's not like she's someone important. She's just a waitress." Behind him, one of his friends closed his eyes, cringing. Even he seemed to sense that was the wrong thing to say to the formidable figure towering over them. Mary's heart sank hearing those words, "just a waitress," used as a slap in the face. She cast her eyes down, feeling that familiar mix of shame and resignation. General Harris, however, took in a sharp breath. His eyes flashed with something fiery. "Just a waitress?" he repeated, his voice carrying a sharp edge of disbelief and anger. He raised his voice now, not only for the boys to hear, but so that every patron in the diner could understand the gravity of what he was about to say. Conversations around the room halted entirely. All attention was riveted on the scene at table 7. "This woman is not just anything," the general declared, his tone cutting through the silence. A hush fell over the diner. Mary looked up in astonishment, her breath catching in her throat. General Harris stepped back from the booth, standing at his full imposing height. The group of teens sat speechless, eyes wide. General Harris drew his heels together with a crisp click, standing at attention. Mary suddenly realized what was happening, and her heart fluttered wildly in her chest. In one smooth motion, General Harris raised his right hand, fingers joined together, and brought it up toward the brim of an invisible hat. He offered Mary Dawson the sharp, impeccable salute of a soldier paying tribute to a superior. Mary's hand flew to her mouth. A gasp rippled through the diner. The teenage boy's jaws hung open as the 4-star Army general held a salute to their waitress. If you want to see respect given where it's due, make sure to subscribe for more inspiring stories. The diner fell into frozen silence as General Harris held his salute, hand to his brow in honor of Mary. For a heartbeat, Mary was too stunned to move. Then, with trembling fingers, she set the ketchup bottle aside on a table and slowly lifted her own hand. In perfect instinct, Mary's spine straightened, and, with tears blurring her vision, she returned the salute. In that moment, she stood not as a waitress, but as the proud Army captain she had once been. A single tear rolled down her cheek as she brought her fingertips to her brow. Only after Mary lowered her hand did General Harris finally let his arm come down. He gave her a deep, respectful nod. The tiniest of smiles warmed his dignified face. In a voice that carried through the stillness, he addressed her formally. "Captain Mary Dawson, on behalf of the United States Army, thank you for your service." Mary's lips quivered. "The thank you, sir," she managed in a soft, broken voice. She stood as if in a dream, hardly believing this was real. All around them, people began to stir. Old Jim at the counter got to his feet and removed his hat, pressing it to his chest. One by one, every customer in the diner slowly rose from their chairs. In seconds, Mary was surrounded by a silent, standing ovation. The group of teenagers scrambled awkwardly out of their booth as well, unsure what to do except stand. The lead boy, the one who had insulted her most, stared at Mary with wide eyes. His face was pale, and his ears burned red with shame. "Ma'am, I'm sorry," he stammered, voice barely above a whisper. We didn't know." His friends stood beside him, nodding earnestly, their earlier cockiness utterly gone. One of them ventured in a timid voice, "Thank you for your service, ma'am." He glanced at the general, then back at Mary, clearly now understanding that she was the one to respect. Mary wiped her wet cheeks with the back of her hand, attempting to compose herself. She looked at the teenagers, not with anger, but with a gentle, forgiving smile. "There's no need to thank me," she said kindly. Her voice was tender, yet it carried in the quiet diner. "And I accept your apology." The boys exhaled in relief. Mary met their eyes one by one. "I hope you understand now. No one is ever just anything," she continued, her voice gaining strength as she spoke from the heart. "Every person you meet might have a story you know nothing about." The teenagers nodded fervently. In their eyes, Mary saw regret and a new respect that hadn't been there before. General Harris stepped forward and put a hand on Mary's shoulder, pride shining in his eyes. He then turned to address the diner patrons who were all still standing, riveted. "I came here today expecting nothing more than a quick lunch," he announced, his voice ringing with emotion. "And instead, I found a hero living quietly among us." He smiled at Mary, then looked around at the others. "Captain Dawson saved lives and served her country with honor. People like her deserve our utmost respect, whether we know their past or not." A murmur of agreement passed through the room. The diner's owner, Millie, had by now emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. Tears brimmed in Millie's eyes. "All these years, Mary, and you never told us," she said, her voice trembling with admiration and a touch of hurt that her friend had kept such a secret. Mary shook her head humbly. "It was a long time ago," she replied softly. "I didn't think it mattered anymore." Millie let out a disbelieving laugh and stepped forward to wrap Mary in a warm hug. A burst of gentle applause swelled in the diner, growing louder by the second. The other patrons clapped, and a few even cheered. Mary blushed and laughed through her tears, overwhelmed by the sudden outpouring of praise. When the applause finally subsided, General Harris cleared his throat, drawing everyone's attention once more. "As it happens," he said, I came to town for a ceremony at the Veterans Hall this afternoon. We're honoring a few local heroes. I had hoped to meet Captain Mary Dawson, only to discover she wasn't on any of our guest lists." He chuckled, shaking his head. "No wonder we couldn't find her. We didn't realize she'd be busy serving pie and coffee at Millie's diner." Light laughter rippled through the crowd. Mary felt her face flush again, this time with modesty rather than shame. General Harris turned to Mary and extended his hand. "We would be honored if you would join us at the ceremony, Captain," he said sincerely. "It's not every day we get to properly honor someone like you." Mary hesitated, wiping her hands on her apron unconsciously. The idea of being recognized in front of a big crowd made her stomach flutter. She glanced around at the diner, at Millie smiling and nodding encouragingly, at old Jim tipping his hat, at the teenagers watching her with hopeful faces, and at General Harris's hand still patiently extended. A broad, genuine smile spread across Mary's face, and she placed her hand in the General's. "All right," she agreed quietly. "I'd be honored, sir." The diner erupted in cheers and applause once more. A couple of patrons whooped, and one of the teenagers let out a short, happy cheer before catching himself and grinning sheepishly. Mary laughed softly, joy and disbelief mingling in her heart. That afternoon, Mary attended the ceremony not as a waitress, but as an honored guest. When she stepped onto the stage at the Veterans Hall, the audience of townsfolk and soldiers erupted in applause. Word of her bravery had spread quickly, and people were eager to show their gratitude. The same teenagers from the diner came to the event, standing in the back and clapping harder than anyone, proud of the hero they had misjudged. In the days that followed, life at the diner took on a new light. Locals began affectionately calling Mary Captain when she refilled their coffee cups. The once rude boys became frequent visitors, always polite and eager to help her clean up at closing time. Mary's long-hidden past had become a point of pride in the community. She felt a deep sense of peace and belonging, knowing that the honor she never sought had finally found her. Not everyone will get a moment of public recognition like Mary did, but her story is a powerful reminder. Every person around us may carry unseen valor, sacrifice, or kindness. Treating people with respect and compassion isn't just about good manners. It's about acknowledging the inherent worth in each individual. Mary's journey taught her whole town that lesson in one unforgettable afternoon, and perhaps it can teach us as well. Never underestimate someone based on their job or appearance. The waitress serving your coffee might just be a hero in disguise. By showing a little kindness and respect, we honor the hidden heroes among us every single day.